our next two, in fact, our last two arguments for atheism or against the existence of a Judeo-Christian monotheistic deity, are a posteriori arguments. That is, they're arguments that have as one of their premises an observation about the way the world is. So they're empirical in at least one of their assumptions. The first of these arguments is called the problem of evil, or the problem of evil and suffering. And it's probably traceable back to Plotinus, who lived from about 204 or 5 BCE to about 270 BCE. And in its modern form, it says something like this. First premise: if God exists, then God is omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent. If God exists, therefore, there would be no evil in the world, since God would know about the evil. Because God is omniscient, God knows everything. God would have the power to change the evil. Since God is omnipotent, God can do anything. And have the strongest possible desire to change that evil, since God is omnibenevolent, superlatively benevolent or loving. So God knows about it, has the power to change it, and is superlatively motivated to change it. So there couldn't be any evil in the world, seemingly, if God exists. Now here's our empirical observation. The world is full of evil. Therefore, God must not, probably does not exist. So this problem is sometimes expressed purely in terms of the notion of evil existing. Other times it's expressed in terms of the notion of evil or suffering. So, for instance, the Lisbon earthquake, which killed so many people in Lisbon in, 1879. It's not something that you might consider to be evil, but it is something that we consider to be suffering. It would consider to be a sort of morally bad, not even morally bad, but just a bad thing, right? So to inflict suffering on someone is to cause them moral harm, because suffering is intrinsically harmful. That's the idea here. So when people present the problem of evil argument, the argument is essentially this: look, an all-powerful, all-knowing, and superlatively loving deity would never allow suffering and evil to exist in the world that they created. And so, again, this seems to be a problem linked to this notion of God as omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent. But it also has this premise about the nature of the world, namely that there is suffering or evil in the world, that we can observe that the prediction made by our concept of God is violated by our observations of the way the world works. Now, in general, responses to the problem of evil deny one or more of its three premises. So, for instance, Robert Adams, who's a philosopher of religion, acknowledges that there is evil in the world. However, he denies that second premise. Namely, Adams asserts that evil doesn't disprove God's existence because a perfect God, all-powerful, all-knowing, omnibenevolent, could have created an imperfect world, even one that's not the best possible world that could have been created without having morally wronged anyone. Now, you have to go through some pretty, strained ethical gyrations to get this notion that God could create a world knowingly, purposefully, that caused harm or suffering or evil to exist that affected people when God didn't have to do that, either not create a world or create a world absent those sorts of things. But this is one position that people will adopt towards the problem of evil. Other objections to this argument consist in the idea that evil is necessary, that suffering is necessary to help you learn God's lessons, for example. But again, this runs across this problem of God's omnipotence, because God could just create you with an understanding of those lessons that you have to learn and not cause all the suffering to teach them to you. That doesn't seem necessary given God's omniscience, omnipotence, and omnibenevolence.